Hi, and welcome to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm Ange MacCabe, CEO and co-founder of Intuitive Performance. I'm a performance coach, HR professional, whole person leadership facilitator, and your host. The Human Side of Business podcast is fueled by the genuine curiosity to understand how personal characteristics and skills can be leveraged to drive individual and team performance, tangible outcomes, and ultimately organizational success within business. Each podcast is devoted to sharing knowledge, expanding our learning edges, and exploring the trends in corporate culture towards growing the emotional intelligence of organizations. I'm so glad you're here. Hi, Chris, and welcome to the Human Side of Business podcast. How are you making out today?
What's up? Thank you so much for being here. It's a beautiful day in McCoursville, Indiana. I think spring is actually coming. I don't actually know. Indiana could be all over the place. Let me knock on wood somewhere, but I think spring is here and it's a beautiful day here in McCoursville, Indiana.
Amazing, amazing. Up here in Nova Scotia, Canada, it's hit or miss. It's a typical spring here where we get freezing rain, and a little kiss of sunshine. So today it's sunshine, so there's no complaints. Right.
Let's go.
Let's go. So I'd like to introduce everyone to Chris Ortega, and he is the CEO of Fresh FP&A, which provides functional CFO advisory services for businesses. And Chris, I'll let you kind of take over the mic with regards to what brings you here in the sense of being that fractional CFO and a little bit more about what you do for your people.
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction. So I lead Fresh FP&A, and we provide fractional CFO and advisory services to high growth businesses. Businesses being software, technology, retail, e-commerce, pharma, and renewable based companies, all high growth businesses. My background has always been in accounting, finance, FP&A, and financial leadership, primarily in high growth businesses. Most recently, I led an international marketing platform company. I built our entire Americas operations, and I helped strategically lead the finance organization through acquisition to SAP, which was a huge opportunity in my career to go build an entire company, an international company in over 28 different countries, to actually have that through acquisition to SAP. Stayed over for a year to help with the post-merger integration, so to kind of help the two organizations integrate together. And then I found myself at this transition point. I found myself in that quintessential fork in the road, right? I know what it takes to build, shape, transform, and scale a finance organization. I've been there. I've done that. I know all the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between. And the second thing is, I felt like there needed to be a fresh perspective brought to finance. There needed to be something new. There needed to be something fun and new and creative brought to finance. So a little over a year ago, I started Fresh FP&A, and I have a team of two other fractional CFOs that are helping me build our Americas operations. I have another fractional CFO based in London. He is building our EMEA operations, and I have another fractional CFO. She is based in Sydney, Australia, and she's building our APAC location. So we're international fractional CFO and advisory business. And our goal and our North Star, which I think is so important for this conversation, is our North Star at Fresh FP&A is we want to use our skills, passions, talents, and experiences to help others realize and achieve greatness. So that's a little bit about me. And I'm based here in McCoursville, Indiana. I'm a Hoosier through and through. So that's a little bit about me and my background.
That's fantastic, Chris. You're not playing around when it comes to setting up shop in multiple nations. And that's fantastic in the sense of, especially what's going on in the environment and the demographics right now, right? Ensuring that we can tap into CFO services. So we're excited to have you here today, but not so much to talk about the financial side of things. We're actually going to talk about empathy and transparency in the office of the CFO. And Chris and I were just having this amazing chat in the green room, we'll call it, firing each other up in the sense of the challenge of vulnerability when it comes to talking about this type of stuff. So Chris, kick us off with regards to your lens around empathy and transparency when it comes from the desk of the CFO.
Man, I tell you what, for all those listeners and those finance leaders, those business leaders, everybody listening to this right now, one of the most undervalued skill sets is empathy across the level. I
Mm,
think being an empathetic leader is a superpower, particularly in the finance organization, right? But it's also a stretch from the traditional to the fresh CFO mindset of what I call, right? When you
mm,
look at the office of the CFO, right? You look at the office of they're the ones giving the numbers, we give our spreadsheets, we give our budgets, right? But when it comes down to putting on that chief feelings officer hat, putting on that CFO hat, where it's more qualitative, it's more warm and fuzzy, it's more about people, that's typically a big challenge for traditional finance leaders to make and fresh CFOs. That is the value that we bring. When
mhm.
you look at the a lot of the macro factors that we're seeing right now globally, right? You look at a global recession that a lot of organizations are going through. You look at a lot of supply chain issues that a lot of industries or businesses are still facing. You look at this talent, this talent, this focus on people, right? Here in the US, you look at financial institution collapsing. You look at continued economic downturn or uncertainty that we're seeing. There are so many different challenges and different hats that people are wearing today. And it is vitally important that we meet people where they are, right? That's
Mm,
empathy, right? To me,
mhm.
empathy is meeting a person where they are and that it's not about having sympathy, right?
Right.
And I think sympathy and empathy get confused, right?
Agree.
Sympathy is I think, like a watered down. It's the Walmart version of empathy, right? Empathy
I'm
is
scared to laugh
deeply
at
understand.
that.
Yeah, it's deeply understanding
Mm,
that business, that person that you're sitting across from, right?
yeah.
That business partner, that VP of sales, that CMO, that chief operating officer, right? And given that finance has now been elevated to this higher this demand from the business, we have a huge opportunity to bring that empathetic, data-driven decision making framework to our finance teams and to our business partners.
There's a lot to unpack there, which I really enjoy, Chris, in the sense that we're moving from an older mindset of transactional strategic responses when it comes to business decisions to blending that empathetic and transactional strategic responses to the business environment that we're operating from in today's day and age, meaning that you're meeting not just your C-suite, but also your team members where they're at. You are looking
Mm.
at it from their perspective and being able to understand what they need, and therefore, when possible, making decisions that can be considered the win-win, right?
Right,
Versus
right.
these are the numbers, this is the decision we ought to make, and this is how we need to crack down, and this is where we need to cut back, et cetera, et cetera. Um, the other thing that was coming up for me, Chris, was like, when you're talking about from the place of blending that empathetic viewpoint with strategy, or your financial backing decisions to management, what's your recommendation or what has been your learnings, I guess, in the past 2 years around ensuring that you're not forgetting that empathetic mindset?
Yeah, I think so. I'll give two frameworks, my top two. The first thing you think about, right, is when you think about building a relationship, right? This can be a personal relationship, this can be a professional relationship. To me, relationships are built on two core pillars, right? Trust and competency. Those are the core pillars of any successful relationship. And when you traditionally look at the office of the CFO and you look at CFOs, when you look at those two pillars, the first one we go towards traditionally is we want to be the smartest finance person in the room. We want to lead with our Excel knowledge. We want to lead with our US GAAP knowledge. We want to lead with our CPA designations. We want to lead with showing the business, showing and building that relationship that we're the
Mm-hmm.
smartest finance person, right? But when
Mm-hmm.
you look at that long term, that's not a core pillar to build on, right? The first thing you want to do for fresh CFOs, we want to build the trust. You
Mm-hmm.
want to sit across from that CMO, that chief marketing officer. You want to sit across from that CEO and say, "Hey, look, right? I want to be your trusted advisor, not your competent calculator, right? I want to be your trusted advisor and I want to come to you. And the best way for all of those listening right now, all of those CFOs, those they want to be CFOs later. Here's one key question that gets you on the road right now to building that trust. Go to that business partner, go to that sales leader, go to that marketing leader, go to that operations leader, ask them this one question. What opportunities, challenge, frustrations, pains do you see in your functional area?
Mm-hmm.
And how can I serve you in solving those elements, right?
Mm.
That question's big. You're not going to them and say, hey, here's the pain that you're having. Here's what I'm frustrated with. We're not commanding the business. We're working with the business. We're communicating effectively. We're collaborating with the business. We're building connection. That's all about that trust. And
Mm.
that's more scalable long term. I look back over my finance career, right? And I look at building Fresh FP&A. I built such a great community of people, and it's all been based on trust. There are
Mm-hmm.
people that reach out to me now. It's like, hey, I worked with Ortega 8 years ago, and I know Ortega's solid. I know he's a strategic level finance leader. Chris was in the trenches with me. Chris was a wartime finance person. And I know if I have a client or if I have someone looking for those services, I'm going to direct them to Chris, right? You think that that kind of network and that kind of partnership and relationship building was built on me being the smartest person in the room? No, it was built on trust. It was built on being vulnerable. It was trust. It was built on meeting that business partner, developing that relationship. So to me, that first framework. The second one that I want to give everybody is what I call the empathetic decision cycle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's simple. People are doing the process. So people to processes turn into data. Data is then turned into information. Information is then shared through knowledge to ultimately make a business decision. People, process, data, information, knowledge, decision. That entire framework is the framework that you can leverage to have a more empathetic, data driven decision making model inside of your team. So but it all starts with making that first step and stepping outside of that comfort zone.
Mm.
So many finance leaders, we're comfortable. We're comfortable with our Excels. We're comfortable with our balance sheet reconciliations. We're comfortable with our forecasting. But when we look at the legacy that we have to build right now,
Mm-hmm.
that's table stakes for businesses. Technology can do all of that. And you want technology to do all that.
Right.
We need to level up our value proposition, and it all starts with the people.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Adding to that, I know we're talking about empathy and transparency, but there's a lot of things that are screaming out at me with regards to what you're saying. Love that you have almost like a people process transactional equation for our transactional listeners out there. I think that's like A1. Adding to the fact that really and truly, I strongly believe self-awareness is the key in unlocking all of
Mm,
this stuff, right? So like when we're talking about moving from that kind of old school mindset of just simply being that competent calculator to your C-suite or to your peers even, it's more around moving to that compassionate CFO place or your chief feeling officer, as you dub it, Chris. I think it's more than just the empathy piece, because if we're not seeing our blind spots, if we're not getting the conversations right with regards to our team members and being able to really keep our finger on the pulse, so cause and effect from a sense of emotional intelligence, then that empathy piece is going to be quite challenging. And so I'll give you an example. I worked in past as an HR director, obviously working closely with the financial team, the marketing team, every single team in the organization. And what I found was the team members within the financial department, they weren't understanding expectations. And so you know how the age-old conversation goes. Well, the employee's not working. I'm frustrated. What are you going to do about it, HR? And so as I started getting really curious to understand, okay, well, where's the gap here, right? Because HR has been dubbed as like the feelers, but in actuality, like you got to be tough. There has to be grit there in the sense of being able to strategically push back and ask the right questions so that it's a win-win for team members and your management team for the sake of the organization. So long story short, what came out of that conversation was that, the CFO was making a lot of assumptions that their team members weren't
mm,
getting it and they weren't competent. And the feedback from an external self-awareness perspective was that the CFO was using too much strategic jargon to their entry-level
mm.
team members. And with that, had the CFO had self-awareness, they'd be like, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't be using, XYZ term in the sense of, my students that are coming in as co-ops or my first year kind of accounting clerks. So there's those types of things that come up in the workplace in the sense of real life examples where, yes, empathy and transparency need to come into play. 100%. We have to have trust so that we can have those conversations. But I feel that it starts with our leadership team in the sense of ensuring that they have full wraparound emotional intelligence. So self-awareness, again, it comes back full cycle to that key of, okay, what do my team members really see? And conversely, what am I thinking? And what's the gap in between all of that?
Yeah, I love it. And just to add to that, self-awareness, this is going to unmask a lot of kinks in a lot of leaders' armors, right? A lot of them don't, and you'd be surprised, right? There are people that have, double the amount of years of experience that I have, right? But their self-awareness is so low. It's like you don't know that's not the right thing to say in a town hall meeting with all of your employees, right? Like you'd be surprised, Angie, how many times I'm surprised by leaders that are just like, what are you doing, right? But that's so critical. But that self-awareness starts with having a very, very I call it like internal, like real conversation with yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I early in my career, I was the most confident. I could do anything. I could be anything. There was no challenge, no adversity that I could ever encounter in business or in finance that I was like, I'm not going to figure my way out of it, right? But then I got to a point and I said, you know what? Like there is power and there is clarity when you say, you know what? I don't have the answer for that. Like, I don't have all the answers. And too many times,
Yeah.
leaders they feel like they need to have all the answers. You need to be the strongest person in the room. You need to have a solution for every question. And I started to realize as I was progressing in leadership that none of that mattered. If you were a great listener, if you communicated, and
Mm-hmm.
if you were the first to take criticism and the last to take congratulations, that was the formula. Like, and I remember unlocking this, and I was like, I don't have to be the smart person in the room and ask every question. I can sit back in the corner. I can patiently add. I can add insights where I need to, and I learned this from a great leader, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was coming into like a SaaS-based business, right? I know SaaS. That's been my background. I had the expertise. It was an international business, and this was my first time to go meet my international colleagues in Vienna. The company was based in Vienna. I just started in October, and they had a on-site because we were working through an ERP implementation in December. And I remember coming over and I'm meeting my international team. These were people from Asia, from London. I was the only person in America, so I was coming from the US.
Mm-hmm.
And long story short, I completely like damaged all the relationships with those people, right? And how I damaged it, they were like, the feedback that my manager gave me was like, Chris, people are intimidated by you. You're too confident. You're too smart. Like
Mm.
in every situation, you want to show people how smart and how knowledgeable you were in SaaS and what you're going to do and all these solutions that you didn't provide an environment for people to actually engage. So you
Mm.
failed. I remember when he told me that, and I was like, how did I fail? Like, what you hired me to lead, and he's like, Chris, I didn't hire you to lead the entire team. I
Mm.
hired you together to level up the team, right? Like, of course you're knowledgeable, of course you got the skills. That's nobody questions that. But the thing that you're missing right now, Chris, is like you need to give that to everybody else. You need to provide an environment where all your skills, passions, talents, experience, and expertise helps level up everybody else. And it took that self-awareness, it took that gut check to
Mm.
be like, man, I need to slow down.
Mm.
And from that point forward, I was like, hey, I'm going to be in meetings, but I'm only going to respond and add value if it adds value to the team, not adding value to myself, right?
Mm.
And I had to get
Mm.
over that. And that was if I'm being honest, Angie, that was a critical point in my career where I failed because I was still focused on me and I when I needed to trade that in for we and us. And too
Mm.
many leaders don't make that. There's leaders right now that have never made that transition. They
Oh, for
never
sure.
made that step and never thought about it. And I think, like you said, that self-awareness and really having a honest conversation with yourself and being real, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being
Mm-hmm.
real with yourself or what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. And boldly, what I say is authentically walking in your truth. That takes a lot. That takes a lot for a leader to be that vulnerable and open and say and to have that conversation with themselves and also reflect that with their teams.
What you're saying is powerful, Chris, and I really appreciate the candor because it's hard as a leader, it's hard as an influencer and someone who is, almost to the top of their game of the profession to sit there and be like, "Hey, I failed." But it comes back to failing fast, and that's how we learn, right? The other thing that was coming up for me when you were chatting, Chris, is that when it comes to leadership, I feel like, and now we're kind of going off a little topic, but bear with me down this rabbit hole because it comes back down to empathy and transparency, is that organizations need to support leaders more. And what I mean by that is not handholds, white picket fence, foosball tables, not that type of stuff. But when you're stepping into leadership, there's a proper grassroots in place so that you understand that you're going from an individual contributor to a team contributor, that you're going from introspective to inter-perspective, right? So really understanding your responsibility and impacts, that now you have a codependency with your team. And if you do a crap job, your team's going to do a crap job. If you do a really good job of leading and elevating your team members, and to your earlier point, serving your team members, kind of digressing even a little bit further, I had one of my coaching clients say to me, "Angela, I'm exhausted. I constantly have to give to my team members." And my response was, staying in the coaching space, what is it do you think that you're like, what beliefs do you currently have as a leader? What are your responsibilities? And it took them a minute to think, because within the response, they knew that it was very transactional and what they were responding. And I said, okay, so how does that socially, or, from a relationship capacity or engagement perspective, how does that impact your team members? What do you think? And so going through those conversations or asking yourself as a leader those types of questions, I think, are really important, because, again, you're going from an individual contributor to, to someone who's influencing a whole team. And, we definitely want to drive results. Of course, we want to hit our goals and our OKRs and our rocks. Any leader that's stepping into that space has that task-oriented perspective, but it's asking yourself, okay, what's a balance? In some circumstances, being more of an affiliative leader, so caring too much about our team members, we may lose sight of our goals and our strategy. We might lose traction. But I think what you're pointing at, Chris, is really having that balance of, okay, you've been hired as a leader. We trust your core competencies. Now I want to see you lead. It's more about those human-centric skills than anything else.
Most definitely, most definitely. I think leadership is not there's a phrase like leadership is like taught, or is it innate in you? It's the like nature versus nurture of like
Yeah,
leadership, right?
that argument,
I'm on
right?
the fence on it, right? Because I think it's more than just like you're born with it. I think there's situations, environments, there's a lot of things that go into it.
For sure.
But when you talk about that leadership, and tying it back to the transparency and vulnerability, man, like people think that vulnerability and not having all the answers, and they think that's a weakness. They also think like one other thing about me that my network, a lot of prospects, a lot of clients tell me, they're like, "Chris, man, you're one of the most humble people we know." And they're like, "We don't see that a lot." And I'm like, those are my superpowers, right? Like those are superpowers and leverage, right? When we talked about earlier, when you're building that relationship with somebody, right? I sit there. One of the key, like if you want to deneutralize and position yourself with anybody in the conversation, right? A simple phrase: help me understand. I'm struggling. I'm seeking some clarity. Help me understand A, B, and C.
Yes.
I run that playbook all the time. I sit
Mm-hmm.
across from somebody and I may know the answer. I may know the answer. I may know the solution. I know exactly what we need to do. I know what we need to start right now. But I sit there and my humility says, "Hey, I'm struggling. I really need your help. And I feel like your expertise. Can you help me better understand this?" What that conversation does right in of itself, it deneutralizes it. You're
Mm-hmm.
coming from a place to seek to understand, then be understood. It's so powerful to do that. But so many times people think, oh, you got the manager title, you got the director title, you got the CFO title. I need to lead. Hey, team, we're going this way. It's not about that, right? It's about being in the trenches and saying, hey, team, where should we go? What do you need? How can I serve you? And what can I do to make sure we get there together,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
There's a great quote that I always say all the time. If you want to move fast, move alone. If you want to move further, move together. My quote, I don't know who said it, but I seen that quote one time and I always reference that
It
because
resonates.
it's so true in leadership, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's so true in the office of the CFO when we're supporting the business, right? We're serving the business. And I've always served people outside the finance organization. That's always been a core competency that I had. And even with my team, right? When it came down to quarterly OKRs, I'm like, you're going to work on projects that get you outside of finance, that get you collaborate, to get you to build
Mm-hmm.
more core competencies that are going to be the future core competencies that you need. And I think that's so important around leadership is that, you so many people think that you should have every answer, have every solution. You should, no, man, there's power in humility. There's power in being vulnerable. There's power in having empathy for your community and your teammates that you help support.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Couldn't agree with any of all of that. Sorry, let me rephrase that. I agree with all of those statements and they resonate, Chris. What's coming up for me is something that you said in the green room, and it really hit home in the sense that we can do a better job in supporting CFOs in different organizations, either having them suggesting a coach, having an internal coach, having leadership development opportunities, because what you had said was, and I've been in places where I've had to create the strategic budget and recommend that my friend be terminated and know this and sit on it for a week. And so tell me more as to, from your personal experiences, how that's impacted you, and then come full circle with regards to how coaching and leadership skill sets can really set our CFOs up for success.
Yeah, I love this topic and we're diving into this. And I think for all the listeners, like this is one of the most important
Mm.
conversations and perspectives to have for finance, right? And let me start at the macro level, right? The macro level is unfortunately when you look on the news, you look at A companies releasing 10% of their workforce, and we kind of find ourselves in this daily news cycle of organizations making these redundancies, right? 5%, 10%, they're getting rid of this, they're getting rid of that, right? And to me, the thing that you don't see from that, and I've been in these seats, I've had to do the financial modeling, right? We have a cash burn target, or we need to decrease our cash burn to extend our cash runway, right? Obviously, one of the most critical parts of any high growth business is going to be that people aspect of it,
Mm.
which I fundamentally disagree. I fundamentally disagree on this. People should not be the first place that you start in increasing or in decreasing your cash burn and extending your runway. That's traditional mindset. Fundamentally doesn't make sense. Why would you get rid of the most valuable assets and those CFOs, those finance leaders be like, well, Chris, they're the most costly. That should be the last place you go. In that fresh CFO perspective, people should be the last toll gate, the last initiative, the last strategy you go after to increase to drive any improvement on any metric. It should be the last. We should flip that around. It should be the first. It should be the last, right? But when people are doing this modeling, right, I've been in roles where, we unfortunately we went through the checklist, we looked at our supplier agreements, we renegotiated our contract, we optimized our spend as much as possible, we looked at banking relationship, we did the checklist of everything that we could possibly do before we had an impact on people. But the quiet side of it is you have your finance team that are doing those models, that are identifying those positions, are looking at the names, right? I've been in a position where I've actually had to do modeling. I go to lunch with a colleague of mine that was on that list of recommendation and scenarios that I provided, that the
Mm-hmm.
CEO has told me that in a week's time they're going to execute on it because that's coming outside of our quarter close. And we want to make sure the rest of the year we have sufficient amount of runway and we hit the financial targets we need to hit. And I'm sitting there, Angie, having lunch with a person that I know in a week's time, their entire life's about to change. Right. And I'm sitting at that lunch meeting and that same colleague is saying like, hey, like, I'm really looking forward to, because this weekend I'm starting to look at search for houses. This emotion that I had to carry, this like this and in finance, right? We get so much confidential information that we have to keep it to ourselves. Like it has to stay with us. I remember sitting on that for that whole weekend. I'm like, man, I did this model where this person is impacted on it. I know in a week's time, I'm working with HR to work on the conversations and the severance packages. I'm working with our legal group so we make sure we have I'm doing all the behind the scenes work. And I know all of this in a week in advance. I know all of it. I can see how all of these dominoes are going to fall, right? That is something that not of people talk about. And there's so many finance professionals that have to carry that, right? I had to carry that the whole weekend. I had to carry that weight of knowing that what I was doing was going to significantly impact somebody's life. Right. Think of the power of that. Right. And nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about the weight, the emotional, the mental health that could have on a finance professional that are doing these analysis that ultimately is going to drive that bottom line result to a business. Right. And I think to me, like, that highlights the point of you got to check in on people on those things, right? And like as I was going through that, I had conversations with our CEO, I had conversations with our board around it, and I said, hey man, like this is really tough to sit with, right? But it talked about you have to have that level of like, I almost looked at it was like, and you know, I think too many times CFOs with that traditional mindset, you got to look past. These are not just people on another Excel spreadsheet. These are human. These are people. These are people with lives and goals and impacts and dreams that they have, right? And I think too many times the CFOs just look at, here's this group of people, we got to reduce about 25%. And they do these mass Excel stripes. And it's like, no, that's a person, man. And to me, I think that's that nobody talks about that difficulty, that pain emotionally, physically, and mentally that has on finance organizations, knowing the decisions, the actions, the plans that you're recommending to leadership is ultimately going to have that people impact. That's a big burden to carry.
100%. And for me, what comes up is that there's opportunities to elevate organizations from a cultural perspective, meaning in those C-suite meetings, there's an allowance for vulnerability. So, you know, our financial professionals can be like, man, I didn't sleep, you know, so I'm showing up today tired. I'm a little bit frustrated with the decision that's coming up. I know it's hard, but I've only had 5 hours of sleep. So here's where I'm at, and continuing those conversations based on agenda items or what have you. So having the vulnerability and culture sets in place to ensure that people can openly express how they're showing up in the workplace, and which in turn organically opens up dialogue and two-way conversation for those supports that you were identifying. From an individual perspective as a leader, it's what resources can you tap into? And if there's anything that I've learned in the past 2 years, it is immensely important to ensure that we can understand and identify our emotions. And lending two pieces of information. One is we have over thousands of combinations of emotions. And with all leaders that I've worked with, when I've asked them, name your emotions, they may be able to name 4 to 7. And if we're looking at current frameworks, Brene Brown, for example, her and her research team has identified 318 emotions. Like, wow. That's an astounding stat, right? And so when you think about it in its granular sense, there is a vast differentiation as to how you react between being sad versus depressed, or frustrated versus aggravated. And so when we start to be able to familiarize ourselves through self-awareness and emotional identification, having situations like this is the ground basis to level up when it comes to resiliency and grit. And so we're talking about all these buzzwords in the leadership teams now in circles. However, there's an opportunity to elevate on how we action those things. So the how to is like where I'm super passionate about, that people really need to understand how they feel. And it's, again, not from a warm and fuzzy perspective. It doesn't mean that you're weak because you're upset or you're sad or you're frustrated, or maybe you're elated in some scenarios outside of this one, of course. But being able to really understand your emotions can therefore help flow with regards to how you're going to react and how your beliefs are formed and how you work with your team members through these stressful times, right? So I think it's really important to educate our leaders around those pieces as well. And of course, through the mode of coaching or facilitations, right? And it doesn't mean that you have to go to a third-party coach. You can have internal coaches to your organization. I think there's another opportunity for organizations really to tap into that, because then they know your people, they know your culture, they know what's going on. Maybe it's a double facet with HR and coaching. I don't know. But there's so many different blends that organizations can really tap into on multiple levels to ensure that especially our financial and HR teams aren't left in their own silos and at their own demise with these really hard decisions that are going on.
Definitely, definitely. I would just add one other resource, right? One of the things I'm like really a strong proponent of is mentorship, right? Both up and down, right? Like I have such a great group of like I call them like my confident committee, right? And these are people that I can go with, and they're going to look me straight in the face and say, Ortega, you're wrong. Ortega, that's stupid. Ortega, that's a great idea. Or Chris, what the hell are you talking about? Right? Like these are people that they're not gonna give me they're gonna really keep it real with me. They're gonna like really be honest. And I tell you the value of having that confident people that I can go to and say, hey man, I'm feeling, and the best way to acknowledge your feelings, say it out loud, right? Like I do that. Like I say, I'm feeling happy, or I'm feeling passionate, or I'm going to say in this conversation, I'm feeling awesome about this conversation, right? Like part of it is just acknowledging that and having a great mentorship of people that you can confidently go to and just be able to confide in and just say, you know what, I'm in a safe place and I know what I'm going to say and I can be my most authentic self and I can just like openly say how I feel, what's frustrating me, and doing that, so powerful. And it goes lower, right? Tying this into leadership, right? The key part of leadership that I think every leader needs to be thinking about is I had a good mentor of mine. His name is Terry Dwyer, right? We worked together and I got to executive leadership at high growth companies. Like I'm leading it, right? And he says, Chris, you now have moved up the escalator to that next floor. You know what your responsibility is now? Go bring back the other future leaders from those lower floors and bring them up. That is now your task. And when he laid down this escalator aspect of it, is like, Chris, you've reached this floor. It is now your responsibility to bring up that next group of leaders, that next group of diverse leaders, right? It's your job. That's your job now. Your job now is not to be the best leader. Your job now is pour into make even better leaders, better than you. And like that sat with me and was like, yeah, this is my CTA now. This is my call to action. And when you reach that level of leadership, now it's not about, the next forecast error that you do around that. It's about impact, right? And to me, tying this back to my business, this is like Fresh FP&A and starting my own business, wearing two different hats, wearing the CEO hat, leading organizations, working with a lot of different prospects and clients, working with clients all across the world. I chased these three things, right? I chased impact over income. I chased people over profits. And I chased purpose over praise, right? And when you start to have like those pillars of like, this is everything I'm chasing. And tying back to what we had a conversation earlier in the green room about, you got to know your purpose, right? And once you're chasing that, everything else falls along inside. So to me, and also as well too, even when you get to that CFO or that CEO, leadership is never about the destination. It's never about that.
No.
It is going to be a continuous journey. you're gonna mold, you're gonna evolve, you're gonna find yourself at different levels. And when you take it from that mindset that this is not a sprint, leadership is a marathon, and I know what my North Star is, and I know what I'm prioritizing as my pillars, and I know what my purpose is gonna be for the next group of leaders. When you kind of have that crystal clear clarity around what leadership actually means, man, the impact that you have and the satisfaction that you get, right?
Yes.
Like the satisfaction every day that I get in working with my team at Fresh FP&A, the satisfaction I get in serving clients all across the world, the impact that I get in serving a broad global finance, FP&A, and CFO community, at the end of the day, that's everything, man. That's what matters. That's what matters. It's not the title. It's not the power. It's not about the money. It's not about the authority. None of that stuff matters, man. How are you making an impact on people, and how are you leveraging your experience that you have to positively impact your community and others around you? That's the real flex.
Definitely, Chris. I don't know if I could say that better myself, to be totally honest. And I was going to ask if there was one thing that you wanted to leave our subscribers with, what would you say?
Yeah, I see. So the one thing I would leave all of those people thinking about, legacy building. Right now, we are in a critical phase across all functional areas, whether you're in HR, whether you're in finance, whether you're in marketing. You have the opportunity to rewrite the legacy. Specifically for me, right? I am passionate with my team in rewriting the legacy of the value of the CFO in the future. And know that you have the opportunity to write that legacy that's going to resonate for the next 5, 10, 15 years. But it all starts with getting outside your comfort zone and taking that first step. So get to writing the legacy that you want to leave, the impact that you want to have, and the value that you want to bring to your community and to the world. To me, that is the last piece of advice I want to give everybody.
That's beautiful, Chris. Thank you so much for your time today. And just one more thing, if we're looking to reach out and connect with you, how do we do that?
Yeah. So if you want to learn more about Fresh FP&A and how we can help build and transform and scale your finance organization, check out our website, www.freshfpa.com. If you want to learn more or connect with me, have any questions, I'm all over LinkedIn, Chris Ortega, or if you just want to type in Fresh CFO, you can find me there on LinkedIn. And also follow our company page on LinkedIn as well. It's just Fresh FP&A in LinkedIn. Follow us. We have insights. We're always providing as much information and value to the fractional CFO and finance and FP&A space. So that's how you can connect with me.
Thank you so much for your time. Take good care. Thanks for listening to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm glad you could join us. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to stay updated with our latest content, make sure to visit our website. The link can be found in the episode description, where you can subscribe to the podcast, sign up for our newsletter, and learn more about our whole person leadership services. Sounds interesting? Explore the whole person leadership cohort by Intuitive Performance, a unique program that offers unparalleled support to managers on every step of their leadership journey. Our program features evidence-based assessments, workbooks, group coaching, and interactive learning experiences to help you level up your leadership skills. Reach out today to apply to one of our upcoming cohorts. Until next time, take care and stay curious.